Well, thank you for coming tonight. Lindsay and I will lead tonight the first of two sessions on listening as an act of solidarity. Let us begin with the line acknowledgement and then a prayer. St. Mark Cathedral acknowledges that we gather on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, who are still here. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and the life of all the Coast Salish tribes. Let us pray. O loving God, empower your one human family to join hands on our journey of faith. Send us your spirit of hope so that we might work to alleviate human suffering and foster peace and justice. Amen. Then, Chris, would you get us to the next slide, please? Thank you. So why are we doing this tonight? We're doing this tonight because really is inspired out of the work that the vestry did last year, and the congregation is adopting from the statement of lament and commitment to action. And this is out of the little introduction, the 3-paragraph introduction, and it says, St. Mark Cathedral reaffirms a commitment to respect the dignity of every human being, to strive for justice and peace among all people, and seek and serve Christ in all persons. We recommend to resolve to condemn the discriminatory and violent discourse and actions in our nation that target particular groups of people based on their skin color, their religion's affiliation, their gender or orientation, their disabilities, or their country of birth. We must do better. And we, and by we is St. Mark's, we pledge to be a network of faithful and prayerful learners, listeners, and activists in God's name, joining others who similarly pledge to look beyond our own blinders and pursue justice. And as you can see, listeners is underlined to get our attention because of I think it comes easy for us to be learners. There's a sense of in my time in this diocese, in my time at St. Mark's, before as a lay person and now as an ordained person, I know that this congregation has a great sense of curiosity. There's a great sense of curiosity, and there's a history, a tradition, if not a culture, of learning, of engaging in conversation, of doing book studies, of having people come and teach us things, of engaging in interesting dialogue and conversations, and very often holding that very Anglican, very Episcopalian ethos of the Via Media, trying to listen to both sides and making room for a third way, for a middle way. And I also know that St. Mark's is known for being active in the community. It's a long tradition and history of us as a congregation, as a parish, to being involved in all sorts of activities in the community, and to be active, and to recruit from our own congregation and continue to look for ways in which we can be present. And I think there's something about the sacramental living, like we know we put our bodies where we say it matters. Now, listening is something that does not come naturally culturally. The idea of listening is one that does not come naturally culturally. We hear, we say we listen, but sometimes So in my time with you, I keep hearing the conversations around we want to hear stories of other people. We want to hear other stories. We want to hear stories from the Duwamish tribes and the other Coast Salish peoples. We want to know stories about other groups in our communities. We want to know what are the stories of Tent City who were here recently. So there is this desire to listen and to be open. So I'm, in a way, I kind of reverting the order in which the statement of commitment is to pay attention, to highlight the importance of listening as we continue developing relationships. You can play the first video, Chris. Yes. And you might have seen this video, and if you've seen it, don't steal the thunder for other people, okay?
Is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13.
How many got 13?
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
I know some of you cyclists here would really appreciate this. It's the same video. They don't do an edit. When I show this to one of my kids, they said, "Oh no, we can stop it now. Thank you, Chris." I'm curious, but we're not gonna go and try to figure out who did it. Thank you. When I show this, my family was, or one of my kids was like, "Is that really the same video?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh, actually, it was you, Lindsay. It was not one of my kids, it was you." That's right, because Elias was smarter, he noticed. But you, did I say that out loud?
Yes.
It was Lindsay. When I showed Lindsay the video, nah, and so I roll it back and I said, "Yeah, from the very beginning." How many of you saw the bear? Have you seen the video before? How many of you in Zoom seen the bear? Did you saw the bear over in Zoom? Originally? No? While this is about paying attention and being awareness and things of seeing and cyclists, it also, to me, the reason I bring it to you is because I want to highlight that often it's possible that we see, but also that we hear, we listen the things that we want to hear or we want to listen. That there are things in conversations, that there are things in stories that are shared to us. In people who have an experience that been an oppressive experience, an experience of marginalization, a traumatic experience, that we might tend to miss by not being fully present and being attentive. Perhaps we might listen to the things that we want to listen. We might want to listen to a sad story, or maybe when somebody's telling us a story and we're getting to know a person and they're sharing with us a story, we're looking for a fixable situation, a way in which I can give you advice. How can I fix this person? Or perhaps I'm looking for a way to compare my life with somebody else's life. And then we do this thing of the suffering Olympics, who suffers more, right? Or perhaps I'm just curious, just my own sense of curiosity about either indigenous people or a curiosity about the transgender experience, or the curiosity of what it is to be an immigrant. Or maybe I'm just looking for an opportunity to blame others or to affirm my biases and stereotypes. So what we pay attention to is often what we hear, what we listen to. So in our desire to be together with others, it's important that we recognize and we make room and space for the things that we're not looking for that might surprise us, and also for what we bring to the encounter of listening to the stories. Then we can go to the next one, Chris. Very briefly, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity, by Simone Weil. The next one, Chris, please. So why listen as an act of solidarity? These are two questions or two parts from our baptismal covenant. Do you renounce the evil powers of this world which corrupt and destroy the creatures of God? I renounce them. Would you strive for justice and peace among all peoples and respect the dignity of every human being? I will with God's help. Our baptism, our baptismal covenant, our baptismal vows give us an identity. It frames us within an identity of God's as God's beloveds, of a community that now embrace a mission of reconciliation, of bringing about how we live the world, but how God intends the world to be. And there is a narrative. There is a narrative of racism, of sexism, of homophobia and xenophobia, of misogyny, of ethnocentrism, and many other isms that are narrative that corrupt and destroy, but they're also narratives that tend to strip that sense of dignity. So as people who are committed to live this life as baptized Christians, listening is an act in which we also live those baptismal vows. It's a way in which we recognize that there are these structures and systems that tells a story. There's a systems and structures that have shaped individuals, and there is a counter narrative of being God's beloveds. And in the act of listening, we can affirm that participation and the reality of dignity for other people. And let me read this to you then also. You might recognize these words. This is from Matthew 25. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous would answer, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the three kings would answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, your members of my family, who are members of my family, You did it to me. Next one, Chris, please. So the invitation is, as we continue exploring what it is to live into our commitment, our statement of commitment, our commitment to action, and we continue to develop relationship and seeking to build or deepen in the relationship and meet new companions in the way. Learners to listeners to activists. That we do the listening with the same intention and attention as we would do with Christ. That the listening that we engage is not that one that is consuming of each other's stories for amusement. That it's not a morbid or an unhealthy way of engaging in a story as when we're watching a reality TV or a reality TV show. But that there's a mutuality of our own sense of humanity and centeredness, that we do it with a posture of attention. That is the kind of listening. It's not just to accumulate just more knowledge or to have that sense of when we're watching a TV show and I shouldn't be watching this, but I'm curious about it. Or those cringy reality TV shows, right? Like, this is terrible, but I'm gonna continue watching this. No, that there is a human connection that we recognize and have a posture of attentiveness, just as we will have an attentiveness to Christ. Next one, Chris, please. So how do you define solidarity? I mean, there's a definition here, but how would you in the group define solidarity? Here or in Zoom? And I do this because I think that's where the camera is. So how would you define solidarity? Together with? Oh, there's a mic, that's right. Together with? Unify? Zoom? Those of you in Zoom, how would you define solidarity?
Standing with.
Stay with the group even when there's disagreement.
Or staying in the group even when there's disagreement. Is that what you said, Steve?
Yes, or surprise.
Solidarity have this implication of togetherness, of companionship. And I mentioned to you that companionship has this root of sharing bread. Pan, the word pan in Espanol and in other languages, but in this case in Espanol, is bread. Compañero is someone you share bread with. And companionment is someone that you walk with together, but is also the sharing of bread and the sharing of life. Accompaniment is about building connection, or solidarity is about building connection. And it's not charity. This is not, I'm giving you a little bit of my time because you seem that you need to unburden something. Charity is kind of top-down and paternalistic. But solidarity is about connection, it's about sharing the human reality and the enigma of human suffering also. And solidarity also to kind of ask something of us. If we're gonna be together in this journey, there's gonna be a conversation that somehow is gonna challenge my assumptions about life. If there's a part of your story that in the trauma that you have experienced is gonna make me question some of my own beliefs and values, then it asks that I'm aware of what triggers me. That we become aware of what our distractions, our fixations, and our fears, and our defensiveness, our insecurities. There is some work that needs to happen for us to be aware of what do we bring to the encounter when we are in listening and truly listening, allowing the other person to be present fully, not just wearing a mask of things are okay, this is fine, it hurt, but that was a long time ago, or I'm resilient, right? That's the word resilient, which means you have to suffer a lot in order to be resilient. So resiliency sometimes is an overhyped word. What do I bring? What are my own fears that might be revealed when I am engaging with a conversation of someone that has a different social location than me? Or how do I experience those defensiveness in my body? Am I all of a sudden saying, well, not all men are the same, when I'm hearing a story about sexism or misogyny? Nor straight men are the same when I hear a story about transphobia or homophobia. And then I'm defending. I feel like I have to, where do I feel that? Is it in my breath? Is it in my stomach? Do I feel it in my shoulders? What are my insecurities? Why do I feel that I need to either defend or over-explain a point? This thing, this work of being self-aware is what allows to create a safe space. Next one, Chris, please. And this is, we're gonna do a breakout session now. Jennifer, I might need to send you this question. Is that correct, or did you get it from the PowerPoint?
Give me just a second, I'll get it from the PowerPoint.
Okay, wonderful. So we're gonna break in small groups, and you know, I think there's enough people here to make at least 2 groups, and I'm gonna let you figure that out yourselves. But I want you to think of a time that you felt truly listened to. A time that you felt truly listened. And when you think about that, how did you feel? Not what you think, but how did you feel? Or maybe how did you know that you were feeling that feeling? When we say things like fear, that's an articulation of a body response. When we say things like I was feeling concerned or worried, or I was joyful, or I feel content and happy, a lot of those have a physiological expression too. So how did you feel? How did you feel? What felt different about this time? What did you notice? What made this experience of being truly listened to different? And what did you take from that encounter? When you going on your way, what did you take with you? Or what did you take with you? So let's do that for about 10 minutes or so in 2 groups, and then come back. But I'm gonna ask you something. And some of you have done this before. When we come back to share, don't share what you share. Share about what you heard, what you listened to in your group, okay? So this is a practice, right? Practice listening is you'll see it's not as easy. You want to share what you thought, or what a reaction to what somebody else say. That's great. We might get there, but just what did you listen in your group? Okay. So again, a moment when you felt truly listened. What did you feel? How do you know that? What felt different about this encounter? What did you notice? What made this experience different? And what did you take from that encounter? Let's do that for 10 minutes and then we'll come back. And for those of you in Zoom, Jennifer will do the magic of put you in different groups.
Okay.
So friends, what did you hear? What did you hear in terms of the time when you felt truly listened to? How did you feel? What was different? What did you notice? What made this experience different, and what did you took? What did you hear? I heard that you were talking. I mean, I'm assuming Zoom people, you guys, but you were talking here. So you have something to share. What did you hear? Oh, let me, wait, our Zoom folks can hear you too.
One thing we heard was that when someone was truly feeling listened to, they modified what they were saying because they weren't sure if the person they were talking to would be able to handle all of the emotion that might be shared. And interestingly enough, another person at the table shared that when they felt that they were not being listened to, they also modified what they were being sharing. I just thought that was interesting how it works both ways.
How about in Zoom, in your small groups, what did you hear?
Steve Moen has his hand raised.
Oh, Steve.
Yeah, I had a sense in our discussion that the atmosphere was almost more important than the content of a communication. So if there was a respect between listener and speaker, and a comfort level, that you could be talking about the great issues of world peace, or you could be talking about how to bake cupcakes, or it wouldn't really make any difference. If you were listened to, it made it a good experience because of the effort people made to create that kind of an atmosphere.
Thank you. Anybody else from Zoom? There is something on the chat. Let me see if I can read it. The woman in a breakout room with the plant over her shoulder. That was quite a description. I like it. Spoke about wanting to ensure someone she was listening before she would open up. Steve talked about having the force of the law behind him as a lawyer, having very different experience of being listened to, exception and social roles. That's very true. That's very true. And I think that's kind of gravitates around what Lindsay will share in a minute. How about this table? Do you have something to share in terms of what you hear, or what you heard, what you listened to?
What I heard in at least three of the expressions was that the listener really set the tone or the container for the person who was speaking. Each of us were speaking, and we were talking then about how much that container changed or held the conversation. So just a commonality between us.
Thank you.
All right. Chris, could you bump it along one slide, please? So when we started the conversation this evening, Eliassine said that, I'm paraphrasing, culturally, we're not very good at listening. Something like that. Culturally, we're not very good at listening. And I stumbled across this quote: as a culture, we treat listening as an automatic process about which there is not a lot to say. It's in the same category as digestion or blinking. So it's interesting that somebody should feel this. I think they're speaking with great honesty and saying that as a culture, we really don't invest much stock in the skill of listening. So we want to spend a little bit of time this evening exploring that cultural tendency just a little bit, because culture is really, really important. Let's bump it on one, Chris. So all human beings live and learn through culture. We all have culture. It is an aspect of being human. And culture really is a form of embodiment. We cannot be embodied beings without the culture that creates the people that we are. Culture is a shared way of making meaning, right? We have a physical culture, the way that we relate to the material world around us. How do we interact with it? What is it for? We have a social culture, the way that we connect and relate to other people. What are other people for? How do we organize ourselves to share space and to live together? We also, as an aspect of culture, is what is the most important thing for us? What is our ultimate concern? What's the point of all of it? So these are certain things that contribute to the way that we think and the way that we make sense of the world and reality around us. So for those of us who live here, you don't have to have been born here, but if you live here, the dominant culture here is of the white middle class. So I think it's worth having a little bit of a poke around in there to see what we can learn about the culture that we're all living in. And remember, when we're having this conversation, this is a conversation about observation, not about value judgments. We're not trying to decide what bits of culture are good or bad, which bits could be better or worse. We're just trying to observe. And by observing, seeing what's all around us, but like the fish in the water that can't see where they're swimming kind of thing, it can be hard sometimes to understand how our culture is impacting our lives and behavior if we don't understand that certain things shape us and change the way that we think and the way that we behave. So I'm wondering, if you think about the dominant culture of the United States, throw me some, and I know this isn't ideal for people on Zoom because it's a long way away, but I would love your suggestions. Throw me some attributes of the dominant culture, of the white middle class culture of the United States. Yep.
Lindsay, can you repeat it so the
Oh,
folks
I'm
who-
sorry. Yes, progress we had. and independence. Collaboration. Anybody on Zoom?
Say the question again, Lindsay.
These are attributes of the dominant culture. So when we think about white middle-class culture, what are some of the attributes that you would associate as cultural traits?
Stability,
Stability. Okay, let's have a couple more. Wealth. The more we can identify, right? Aspiration. We've got wealth, aspiration.
Focus on the nuclear family.
Focus on nuclear family.
Disdain for poverty.
Disdain for poverty.
Yeah.
All right. Disdain for poverty. There was one in the room here too that I missed. Achievement. Hmm. Emotionally restrained.
Did that get to it, Phil? Did I express it?
Stiff upper lip. Individualism. Patriarchy. Any more we want to add?
Youth culture.
Youth culture. All right. Any last ones? Any burning additions for the list? Heteronormative. Heteronormativity, maybe heteronormative. Heteronormative. Did somebody say Christian? Christian. It's all getting a bit sloppy over here.
Competition or competitive
Yes.
spirit.
Competition. Racist. Okay. Well, it doesn't have to be neither positive or negative. They're just observations, right? Okay. Entrepreneurial. All right, so there's some here.
Lindsay Brooke has added some powerful words to the chat. Can you see, or would you like me to read them?
Oh, if you could read them, that would be terrific.
Sure. Emotionally reserved,
Yep,
stoic,
yep.
frigid,
Yep.
closed off, terse, and harried.
All right. That's quite a caricature we're building here of the dominant culture, right?
The
All
gloves.
right. Thank you. So obviously our culture not only is this an observance of our culture, but our culture also does attach value to a lot of these words. I'm going to pick out some in particular, words like progress, independence, entrepreneurial, emotionally restrained, racist, aspirational, focus on wealth, heteronormativity, stability, individualism, patriarchy. These kinds of aspects of white dominant culture are the driving force behind what has been built by white dominant culture across the planet, right? They're the driving force behind complex trade and economic systems. They've played a role in the development of judicial systems, industrialization, globalization, certain advances in healthcare, technology, scientific discovery. There are things, right? There are things that are born out of these characteristics. White middle class culture is really productive, right? Productive. And I think that that's a really important word to remember, productive. It is a culture that places high value on productivity. Let's go to the next slide. So if we bear in mind the fact that ours is a culture that places high value on productivity, and then we look at some of the words that we've collected here that summarize features or recognizable characteristics of our culture, you can see here that, of course, that's going to have a bearing on our relationship with time, the way that we view ourselves, and the way that we view our neighbor. And each of these three things plays a really important role on our ability to listen. So our relationship with time, our understanding of the self, and our relationship to or understanding of our neighbor. Let's go to the next slide, Chris. So likely, most of us, most of you, most of me, I don't know, likely, right? We don't subscribe to this consciously. We're not actually, most of us, thinking that time is money. But the reality, again, of the things that play into white middle class culture means that there is definitely an undercurrent or a pressure for us to think about how we use our time. Listen to the language. We're under pressure to invest our time wisely, to spend our time with care, to share our time with others because we're probably on a promise of some kind of return. As a culture, we're really not encouraged to give away our time freely, to be generous with our time. And we're not socialized to offer up our time when there's nothing in it really for us. I do think it's worth noting that the metaphor that we put to use most often culturally around time connects it with money. Our culture is productive, and because of its desire for productivity over and above all things, it really wants to be efficient. Efficiency is a very highly valued thing. The white middle class culture has a natural aversion to wasting time. So I wonder, with all of these words and this kind of, all of this coming up, any responses to any of this so far? Any responses to kind of our relationship with time, thinking about it like this, in this way? Does it sound familiar? Is it comfortable? I don't find it very comfortable. Yes, Sarah. Thank you.
It makes me think about in the workplace how often we talk about how busy we are as a way of signaling how time connects up with many of those other values on the list that we made.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
And because those words are kind of directional, it shows how much when we're in the weeds, we don't really have good skills because it all has to be going fast,
Yeah,
right? And life isn't like that.
yeah,
So it shows we don't really have what we need.
yeah. Yeah, thank you. Oh, and someone's got their hand up on Zoom. Elizabeth.
Yeah, it makes me feel very sad.
Yeah,
So much hurry, hurry, hurry.
yeah,
And if I have one really strong regret, it's that I worked so much when my children were small. I spent every weekend, every night with them, but I missed so much. And it's very painful now to look back at that. And I think we have this toxic definition of being busy as being worthy
yes.
in our culture. You know, if you're busy, if you're working hard, good for you, you know, and achievement. And I think we miss so much that other cultures don't miss, frankly.
Thank you. Yeah. Let's move on to the next slide, Chris.
Lindsay, make me think of a quote I saw somewhere online that says that the person who asks you what you do for a living is just trying to figure out how much respect to attribute you based on what you do.
Yeah, yeah.
Even that just makes me think, it's just so funny. The first question, it's like, how are you doing? You know, like, or what have you been up to? Like, what are you doing? But the question is always about the action or what has been produced. It's one of the things I hate about going back to visit family and friends. And they're like, what have you been doing in Seattle?
Yeah.
Or not like, how are you? Or like, what have you been thinking about? But it's just about that. And then the counter response will be like, I've been so busy.
Yeah.
And then we just exchange like busy, busy, busy. How boring is that conversation?
Yeah.
Right, after every vacation. And there were 100 emails.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So we're placing high value on that. High value on productivity. What do we do? Yeah.
It just reminded me of a story. Where our family lived in Ethiopia for a year, and when we came back, we flew directly to London. And I remember our family got off of like one of the subways, and we all sat in the subway, and we were just like shocked at how fast everybody was moving around us. We just couldn't quite understand what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was an interesting experience,
I bet.
but now it feels really normal again.
Thank you. Let's move on, Chris, then to the next slide. Yes, please. So this really is, somebody mentioned here about individualism. Individualism is such a rooting principle of our culture. And this one's a really big one, because what individualism does to each of us is it centers our reality within our own experience. So everything, there's me, the universe, and there's everything else as it relates to me, right? So this is very deeply ingrained in our inherited cultural structures. As a result of individualism, as some people pointed out here, one of the things, independence was on here. Independence is huge in an individualistic culture. Independence, freedom. I want my own freedom to be able to make my own decisions, right? And I get to make my own decisions, even if there are impacts to others. even if what I want is not what the group wants, even if what I want is not what society needs. These are values that are part of our culture. So we have to be able to recognize that they're working on us and putting pressure on us. So individualism obviously is contrasted with collectivism, which is the opposite of that. That's a culture where the priority is always placed on the group, the welfare of the group, the needs of the group over any needs or wants of any one individual. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So we've got our relationship with time. We've got this cultural need, right, to be productive and efficient. We've got a whole universe that resides within each of us that is connecting with the rest of the world. It is of little surprise then that culturally we are formed, socialized, trained, if you like, to instrumentalize other people, to see other people as a means to an end. And in sort of the history of Western thought, there's been a lot of philosophical and ethical wrestling with this for hundreds of years. Yet, if you have an individualistic culture, this likely is the way that it plays out. You're looking at your relationships as a way of providing for a need that you may have. So, because in an individualistic culture, there's this expectation that we can each, so I assume a bit of myself, so I'm going to assume it of you too. I'm going to look after myself, you're going to look after yourself. And so the way that we kind of interact with each other is this assumption that everybody is taking care primarily of their own needs first. So I wonder if we could take a few minutes here and break into our groups and digesting those three things: time, individualism, and the instrumentalization of our neighbor. Share a little bit, could just skip on to the next slide, Chris. Share a little bit with one another about what does this all have to do with listening? And maybe you could share from your own perspective, being the experts that we are of centering ourselves, and talk a little bit about how you are aware of how those three things, you are impacted by it, or you feel the effects of it on the way that you act. Does that make sense? So what does all this have to do with listening? How does this impact you as a listener? And how have you experienced the impact of this when being listened to? Let's take 10 minutes. Oh, time, self, and the relationship to neighbor. Is it on? Okay. Oops. Can you hear me? Yeah. Welcome back, everybody. I would love to hear what you all were talking about. Who would like to share? Who would be willing to share a little bit about what you were talking about? Some of the responses to our cultural attributes as they relate to us as listeners.
We had a discussion in our group about homelessness and the idea that if Jesus was here, he would be perfectly comfortable in spending time with the homeless. But for many of us, it's kind of awkward. And if we do spend some time with the homeless, we're considered ultra liberal or something. But our culture is saying, well, if we pay taxes, the mayor and the police department should take care of this. I shouldn't have to bother with this. And that's a a very penetrating, critical observation about modern culture.
Yeah, we've built, because of our cultural attributes, we've built a really complex system. And so we can deny the humanity of those experiencing homelessness and shunt the responsibility for care onto this complex system that we've built that we expect should now be able to take care of things. Ruth, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, one of the things that came up was that because our culture wants us to be productive and useful, it's harder for us to truly listen and hear out because we need to fix. We want to be fixers. I thought that was one of the good things that came out in our group.
Thank you, Ruth. I think that's a really important observation.
Oops.
Sarah has a... There's a lot of, for those of you on Zoom, there's a lot of grinning on this table. Everyone just staring at me and grinning. I wonder what they were talking about. Let's find out.
I'll do my best. I think we were talking across a bunch of different stories about the ways that those three things are tightly bound to one another, that all the things on that whiteboard set up, become internalized to the individual that then cascade out to the group, the other, the neighbor, in ways that have this imperative for busy and decision and action that is in tension with the actual listening.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody on your table? Here it comes.
Well, we also jumped on several topics, but we mentioned you, Katie, worked with cancer patients, and I don't think I can explain it well, but she mentioned how the world that she was part of, correct me if I'm wrong, that she can't do much about it after, because there are unlimited on time. So based on a patient, it might be 3 to 5 years or very short term. So that patient's thinking about that exact timing and what the moment of what they need to do, besides what in the individual culture where it's fully not like that in a sense, is more of we're thinking about the future while that patient is not thinking about the future, thinking about what needs to be done before they are gone. So also we kind of changed topics and we mentioned something about hope. So, which is a good thing, hope about the new generation. And I think that's a good part about listening, where I mentioned there's a mom who is very open and listening to her 2-year-old son who is accepting that he wants to be a female. And that's an amazing part of listening to a new generation, or where there's a change, there's a hope that hopefully, like I mentioned, it's like a rough draft, it's not finalized, but there's a big chance of a hope of things are changing for future generations, and hopefully it can translate to generations after I am gone too. So that's where we ended up at. Yeah.
Thank you.
One other thing that I heard in our group was talking about the different arenas that we listen as part of a job or a role, and that sometimes the goal of your job is to be listening for a certain thing to bring about something else, and that in that sometimes we can feel like we're not good listeners because there's a driving agenda, and you could see how that could be in a culture, a driving agenda of something, but it can be even down to our daily work of where we miss, don't listen well, but there's a role or there's a job too. And then that gets muddy about like, am I a good listener or not a good listener? Or how do I be a good listener when I have a job to be a very mechanistic listener? I think so. It was a good discussion on that. Listening isn't all the same at all times.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Chris, would you go to the slide with the statement? So I want to end tonight where we began. And it is with the statement of lament and commitment to action. And I want you to hear it in the light of what we just discussed. And how, I don't want to put a lot of words in here, but how it is a shift of framing. St. Mark's Cathedral reaffirms its commitment to respect the dignity of every human being, strive for justice and peace among all people, and seek and serve Christ in all persons. We recommend our resolve to condemn the discriminatory and violent discourse and actions in our nation that target particular groups of people based on their skin color, their religious affiliation, the gender or orientation, their disabilities, and the country of birth. We must do better. And we pledge, and that is us as a congregation and as individuals too, to be a network of faithful and prayerful learners, listeners, and activists in God's name, joining others who similarly pledge to look beyond our own blinders and pursue justice. So right before the sentence that speak about being listeners, there is the resolve to condemn the discriminatory and violent discourse, and then there's a list of how this why the discrimination happened and who takes on the violent discourse. People who are discriminated, marginalized, oppressed, abused, violated because of their color skin or their religious affiliation or their gender orientation, their disability, the country of birth of others. These are not just simple tags. They're life experiences that live in the body, that are part of our stories. And the work that we've done tonight is to somehow raise to the surface the need of awareness of how our culture shapes us to have a disconnection in terms of the stories that we listen. So to listen to a story that I tell one of you about my child playing saxophone is very different than the story when I tell you when I feel followed at a store, or a story that I would tell you that I feel discriminated at a particular church. Those stories are very different. So there's a sense of openness, the sense of awareness that we need to continue to work through as we pledge, commit to be good listeners and learners and activists, and to be in compañerismo and accompaniment and solidarity with others. Next week, we will have an opportunity to listen to stories and also to share some stories. And it'll be a time in which you can practice listening to one another as well. So thank you for tonight. Let us pray, and then we'll go and continue whatever is left of our day, and just enjoy the evening and rest. The Lord be with you. Grant us, O Lord, the grace and the courage to be open, to create safe spaces, to know ourselves, to work on ourselves as we create spaces that are safe and that are transformative, space of deep hospitality and love. Be with us tonight. Grant us rest. Be with those who are suffering. Be with those who are lonely. Watch over our families, our loved ones. We pray this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you, friends. See you soon.